There's a kind of love that does not announce itself. It doesn't come with grand gestures or words written in cards. It lives in the small, invisible choices, the ones no one ever sees. The ones made in the dark, in the quiet, in the moments between one difficult breath and the next. The ones that cost everything and are never thanked and never witnessed and never fully understood by anyone who has not had to make them. Elena made those choices every single day for 6 years. She woke up every morning in a house that did not feel like a home, looked at her daughter's sleeping face, and decided, again, to stay. Not because she was weak, not because she didn't know better, not because she had given up on herself or on her life or on the idea that things could be different, but because she believed with everything she had that her pain was the price of her daughter's safety, that if she could just absorb enough of it, hold enough of it inside herself, carry enough of it quietly, then Maya would be spared. Then Maya would grow up okay. Then Maya would not have to know what the world could really be like. She was wrong, but it would take 6 years, one ordinary evening, and a little girl standing in a doorway to show her how. This is her story, and it is not an easy one, but is a true one. And there are more women living it right now, in houses on ordinary streets, in ordinary neighborhoods, than most people are willing to believe. Women who smile at school pickup. Women who answer, "I'm fine," with complete conviction. Women who have become so skilled at holding the walls up that no one standing outside can see that the walls are the only thing keeping the whole structure from collapse. This is for them too. People who knew Elena before always say the same thing when they try to describe her. They pause. They smile a little, the way people smile when a memory catches them off guard. And then they say, "She lit up a room." Not in the way that people mean when they're being polite or reaching for something kind to say. They mean it the way you mean it when you're talking about someone genuinely rare. Someone whose laugh was contagious before she even got to the punchline. Someone who remembered your birthday, your coffee order, the name of your mother's dog. Someone who made you feel, in her presence, like you were the most interesting person in the room, even when you suspected you weren't. Elena was that person. She grew up in a modest household, the second of 3 siblings. Her mother worked long hours and came home tired in the particular way that working mothers do. Not defeated, but quieted. Her father was mostly absent. Not cruel, not dramatic, simply elsewhere, in the way that some men are elsewhere, even when they're sitting at the same table. Elena learned early, in the way children learn the things no one directly teaches them, that love was something you earned by being useful, by being easy, by taking up the right amount of space. Not too much, not so little that you became invisible, just enough to be appreciated without becoming a burden. She carried that lesson with her into every relationship she would ever have. It is important to understand that, because it matters later when we try to make sense of the choices she made and the silence she kept. The roots of those choices go much further back than Daniel. They go all the way back to a little girl who learned that the quietest version of herself was the most lovable one. She was 24 years old when she met him. His name was Daniel. And in the beginning, in the very beginning before anything had a chance to go wrong, he was everything she had been told to look for. He was attentive in the way that feels like being truly seen. He was consistent in a way that felt, to someone who had grown up around inconsistency, almost miraculous. He called when he said he would call. He showed up when he said he would show up. He remembered the small things she mentioned in passing. A book she wanted to read, a restaurant she had walked past and wondered about, a worry she had expressed once and half forgotten. He brought these things back to her like gifts, like proof that he had been listening when no one else had. To a woman who had spent her life around people who disappeared, who drifted, who were always slightly somewhere else even when they were present. This felt like something close to extraordinary. It felt like being chosen. Within 8 months, they were living together. Her childhood friend, who had known Elena since they were 12 years old, sat across from us and tried to explain what those early months looked like from the outside. She said that Elena seemed happy, and then she paused and corrected herself. She said Elena seemed relieved, like someone who had finally put down something heavy they'd been carrying for a long time. And at the time, that seemed like a good thing. It seemed like love doing what love is supposed to do. But there was something she couldn't name, she said. Some quality to Daniel that sat just slightly wrong. He was never rude to her directly. He was always perfectly pleasant in company. But there was something in the way he positioned himself next to Elena. The way his hand rested on her back. The way his eyes would find her across a room, not with warmth, but with something more proprietary. Something that said, she is accounted for. She is mine. The friend didn't say anything at the time. Elena was happy, or happy adjacent, at least. And happiness, when you love someone, has a way of silencing the quieter, more uncomfortable observations. You file them away. You tell yourself you're imagining things. You tell yourself it's not your place. She has thought about that decision many times since. The first incident happened 14 months into the relationship. Elena has spoken about it in the particular careful, measured way that people speak about things they have had to work very hard to make peace with. Things they have turned over so many times in their minds that the edges have finally gone smooth. It was an argument about something she can no longer remember. Something small, something ordinary, the kind of disagreement that in a healthy relationship would have been resolved in 20 minutes and forgotten by morning. But it escalated in a way that arguments between them had begun to escalate. And at the peak of it, he grabbed her arm. Hard. Hard enough that her first sensation was surprise rather than pain. And then the pain came after, and then the bruise, and she stood there in her own kitchen looking at his face and not quite recognizing it. He cried afterward. He held her face in his hands and told her he was sorry. He told her it would never happen again. He told her he didn't know what had come over him, that he was terrified of losing her, that the thought of losing her made him someone he didn't want to be. He was so genuinely distressed, so completely undone by what he had done, that the evening ended with Elena comforting him, with her hand on his back, with her voice saying that it was okay, that she understood. She believed him, not because she was naive. She was not a naive woman, but because she wanted it to be true more than she had wanted many things in her life. Because the alternative, that the man she had built her life around was not who she had believed him to be, that the relief she had felt was built on something false, that she had been wrong in the most fundamental possible way, was a door she was not yet ready to open. So she closed it, quietly. She did not tell her friend. She did not call her sister. She did not write it in a journal or process it with anyone or allow it to be a thing that had happened. She simply placed it somewhere interior and continued. That silence was the first stone in a wall that would take years to build and cost her everything to finally break through. By the time Maya was born, Elena's world had become very small. It had not happened all at once. It never does with these things. It happened the way water shapes stone, slowly, imperceptibly, one drop at a time, over a period long enough that the change is invisible until suddenly you look at the stone and realize it bears no resemblance to what it once was. Elena did not notice it happening because she was inside it. Because when you are inside something, you cannot see its dimensions. You can only see what is directly in front of you. And what was directly in front of Elena every day was the work of managing her life. Managing him, managing the tension, managing the distance between what her life looked like and what it actually was. Daniel had not forbidden her friendships, not with explicit words. He was too careful for that, too intelligent in the particular way that controlling people can be intelligent. He had simply made those friendships expensive. A comment when she returned from seeing someone. A mood that settled over the apartment after she had been on the phone too long. An argument that would somehow, through a series of steps she could never quite retrace, circle back to the time she had spent away from him, the attention she had given to someone else, the evidence, his word, that she did not value what they had. It became easier, 1 degree at a time, to not make plans, to let calls go unanswered because the aftermath wasn't worth it, to cancel and apologize and eventually stop being invited because she had canceled too many times. It became easier to stay home, to keep the peace, to shrink. Her sister stopped hearing from her regularly. Her mother, who had once known the intimate details of her daughter's daily life, gradually began receiving only the curated version, the version that was fine, that was managing, that had nothing alarming in it. Elena became skilled at performing normalcy, at constructing a surface that could be inspected and found acceptable. And then Maya arrived, and something in Elena that had been slowly going quiet roared back to life. She looked at her daughter, hours old, impossibly small, fingers curled like something that had not yet decided to fully open, and felt a love so ferocious it frightened her. Not the soft, gentle love she had expected from everything she had ever read or been told. Something with more force to it. Something that had edges, that had weight, that arrived in her chest like a commandment. She told herself, in that hospital room, that this child would not grow up afraid, that this child would not learn to make herself small for anyone, that this child would know, in her bones, that she was worth taking up space, that she was worth being loud and inconvenient and exactly as much as she was. The cruelty of what came next is that Elena spent the following years trying to protect Maya from the very thing she was simultaneously teaching her to survive. Because Daniel did not stop. The incidents became a rhythm. Not random. Rhythms never are. There was a pattern to them that Elena came to know the way you know the weather patterns of a place you have lived for a long time. Tension building first, over days sometimes, accumulating in small ways. A tone of voice, a prolonged silence, the sense of a pressure system moving in. Then the explosion. Sharp and violent and always somehow shocking, because some part of her never fully accepted that it was going to happen again, even when every other part of her knew that it was. And then the aftermath, the apologies in the early years. Later, as time went on, not even those. Just silence. The unspoken expectation that life would resume, that the table would be set again, and the day would continue, and no acknowledgement would be made of what had just occurred. Elena became an expert at reading him, at sensing the shift in his energy before he even entered a room, while she could still hear his key in the lock. She learned which topics to avoid and which silences needed to be filled, and which expressions on her own face might function as an ignition. She learned to laugh at the moments that required laughter, to agree when she did not agree, to make herself into whatever shape the room required, whatever shape would keep things calm for one more hour, one more evening, one more night. And all of it, every calculation, every negotiation, every small surrender, she made for Maya. She positioned herself, always, between her daughter and his anger. At the dinner table, in the hallway, during arguments that had nothing to do with the child. If she sensed that his attention was beginning to shift toward Maya, a crying spell, a spilled glass, a child simply being a child in the inconvenient and unpredictable way that children are, Elena would redirect it. Back toward herself. She would say something, do something to pull the heat of his attention away from her daughter and onto her own body. She chose the hit so that her daughter would not feel his fury. She did this for years, and in her own mind, it was motherhood, the most essential form of it, the thing that no one would ever see or know about or thank her for, and she did not need them to. The world did not need to know. It was enough that Maya was okay. It was enough that Maya could sleep at night and wake up in the morning and go to school and come home and do her homework and feel, at some fundamental level, that the ground beneath her was solid. What Elena could not yet see, what she would not be able to see for a very long time, was that Maya saw everything. Children always do. They are watching in the moments we believe they are not watching. They are filing information away in the moments we believe they are absorbed in something else. They're constructing their understanding of the world, not from what they are told, but from what they observe, from the patterns of behavior that surround them, from the atmosphere they breathe. Maya had been breathing this atmosphere for her entire life. There are things that sustained fear does to a human body that most people never have to learn. Elena learned them all. She developed a habit, sometime in the third year, of checking exits whenever she entered a room. Not consciously at first. It began below the level of deliberate thought, the way survival responses often do. Her eyes would simply move automatically to the door, to the window, to the space between herself and whatever was nearest. She noticed it one afternoon in a grocery store of all places, standing in an aisle, completely safe, and her eyes tracking exits anyway, her body running the same calculation it ran in her own home. She stood there for a moment and understood that the fear had stopped being situational. It had become structural. It had built itself into her nervous system and made itself permanent. She stopped sleeping deeply. Some part of her remained alert, even in the hours that should have allowed full rest. Her body had learned that night was not necessarily safe and had made its own adjustments accordingly. She moved through the days on an amount of sleep that was technically sufficient and actually insufficient, held together by the particular adrenaline of a person who cannot afford to fall apart. She had panic attacks she managed alone in bathrooms, with the tap running so that the sound of water covered the sound of her trying to remember how to breathe. She would grip the sides of the sink and look at her own face in the mirror and talk herself back from the edge of it. And then she would dry her hands and open the door and return to whatever was happening in the next room as if she had simply gone to wash her hands. She became two people, the one that existed in that apartment, managing and containing and surviving, and the one that existed in her own interior, exhausted, frightened, grieving the life she had once imagined for herself. The distance between those two people grew, year by year, until they barely recognized each other. And through all of it, she kept going, because Maya needed breakfast in the morning, because Maya had a school project due on Thursday, because Maya had asked for something specific for dinner and Elena had promised. And keeping small promises was a way of maintaining the thread of the life she was trying to preserve for her daughter. She kept going the way people keep going when stopping is not an option they have access to. One day at a time, 1 hour, sometimes, one decision at a time. What Elena could not protect, despite everything, was her daughter's perception. Maya was 7 years old when Elena first saw it clearly. They were at a park on an ordinary Saturday afternoon. The kind of afternoon that exists in retrospect as a before moment. The kind you remember because of what it clarified rather than what happened in it. Another child, running, collided with Maya. Just two children, moving fast in the way that children move, and a collision that was entirely innocent and entirely without consequence. The other child bounced off and kept running. These things happen at parks 100 times a day. And Maya froze, went completely still. Her small body went rigid and her eyes went wide, and she waited. Waited to see what was coming next. Waited for the response. Waited for the consequence that experience had taught her to expect after an unexpected physical impact. Elena stood very still and watched her 7-year-old daughter brace for impact from a stranger who had simply bumped into her at a park on a Saturday afternoon. And something broke open in her chest that she did not have adequate words for. Not then, not for a long time. Something that was grief and horror and recognition all at once. The recognition, specifically, that Maya had not learned this response at the park. Maya had learned this response at home, in the same house, from the same atmosphere that Elena had believed for years that she was successfully shielding her daughter from. She had been so focused on placing herself physically between her daughter and the worst moments that she had not understood. The worst damage was not being done in the worst moments. It was being done in the accumulated ordinary ones, in the tension that lived in the walls, in the way everyone in that house moved through space, in the way laughter stopped when a key turned in a lock, in the way Maya had learned at 7 years old that unexpected physical contact was something you braced for. Elena went home that evening and sat in the bathroom for a long time. She did not cry. She had trained herself out of crying years ago. It provoked a specific response in him that she had learned to avoid. So she sat, still and quiet, and she allowed herself to fully understand something that she had been circling for years without landing on directly. She was not protecting Maya. She had never been protecting Maya. She had been protecting herself from the unbearable knowledge that her daughter was being harmed. She had constructed an entire interior logic. I am staying for her. I am absorbing this for her. I am the shield between her and this because the alternative was too devastating to hold. The alternative was that there was no version of staying that protected her child, that the house itself was the harm. That every day she remained was another day her daughter spent learning that this was what love looked like, what home felt like, what she was worth. She had memorized a phone number 6 months earlier, a domestic violence hotline. She had written it on a small piece of paper and tucked it into the lining of her coat during a period when she had briefly allowed herself to imagine that leaving was possible. She had not called it yet, but she had not thrown it away either. That matters. In the full accounting of Elena's story, that small act, keeping that piece of paper through 6 months of days that made leaving seem impossible, that small stubborn act of not throwing it away is one of the most important things she ever did. It was the part of her that had not fully surrendered, the part that was still, somewhere underneath everything, making preparations. The part that believed, even in her most hollowed-out moments, that there might still be a door. It was not the worst night. That is always the first thing Elena says when she talks about it. She says it quietly, with a particular expression that is difficult to describe, something between apology and emphasis, as if the night needs to justify itself, as if it should have been the worst one to earn the weight of what it became. But it wasn't. There had been worse nights. Nights that had driven her into rooms she locked from the inside. Nights she had spent calculating whether she could get Maya to the car before he got to the front door. Nights she had lain awake in the hours before dawn and understood that the danger she was in was real and present and had no guaranteed end. This night began the way many others had, with tension that had been building for several days, accumulating in the particular way it did, invisible to anyone outside, but completely legible to Elena, who had been reading these signs for years. An argument found its shape over something small, something that was never really about the small thing, something that was always underneath about power, about his need to establish it and her accumulated exhaustion with surrendering it. It escalated, the way it always did, and Elena did what her body had learned to do. She positioned herself, she managed, she tried to find the path through it that led to the other side with the least damage. She had done this so many times that it had become a kind of expertise, a terrible, private expertise that no one outside those walls would ever recognize as skill. And then she heard a small sound from the hallway, a footstep, the specific sound of a small foot on a wooden floor. She turned, and Maya was standing in the doorway, 7 years old, dark hair loose and messy from sleep, wearing the pajamas with the small stars on them that she had specifically requested for her last birthday. Her eyes were wide, and she was completely, utterly still. Elena had never let Maya see. 6 years of careful, exhausting architecture, keeping her daughter occupied in another room, putting her to bed early on the nights she sensed were going to be difficult, placing herself always and without exception between her child and the truth of what their home was. 6 years of sustained, deliberate effort. And Maya was simply there, standing in the doorway in her star pajamas at whatever hour it was, watching. Elena looked at her daughter's face, and she saw something that she had not allowed herself to see before, because seeing it would have required acknowledging something she was not ready to acknowledge. Maya was not wearing the expression of a child who has stumbled onto something shocking and new. She was not frightened in the way of someone encountering a thing for the first time. She was frightened in the way of someone who has been waiting for something they already knew was inevitable. Her small face held a resignation that had no business being on a 7-year-old. A resignation that could only have been learned, that could only have been built quietly over years of nights exactly like this one. She had known, all along, behind the door Elena had worked so hard to keep closed. Maya had known. Elena has said that in that moment, everything became very quiet and very clear. Not in a dramatic way, not with the force of a revelation or the heat of anger. More like the specific, flat clarity that arrives when you have been avoiding a truth for so long that it finally simply sits down in front of you and refuses to move. There was no more path through this that led anywhere she wanted to go. There was no version of this night, or the next night, or the night after that would not cost her daughter something essential. Something that, if she waited long enough, could not be recovered. She did not fight back. She did not escalate. She did not do any of the things that the anger in her chest might have justified. She waited, with the specific patience of a woman who has survived by knowing when to be still for the moment when his attention broke. For the small window that she recognized from years of watching would come. And when it came, she moved. She walked to the hallway. She took Maya's hand in hers. She walked to the front door, opened it, and stepped outside. In her socks. No bag. No plan. No charger for the phone that was already running low. She had saved a small amount of cash over many months, tucked behind the bathroom mirror, and she left it. There was no time to think about any of that. There was only the door and the night air on her face and her daughter's hand in hers, and the understanding that she was not going back through that door. She drove to a gas station several miles away. She sat in the car with Maya in the back seat. Neither of them spoke for a little while. And then Elena reached into the lining of her coat. The piece of paper was still there. She unfolded it. She dialed the number. It rang twice. A woman answered on the other end, calm and immediate and completely present. Elena opened her mouth, and for the first time in 6 years, she told the truth. What comes after leaving is not a movie ending. It is not a clean break or a bright room or an immediate sense that the worst is over. It is important to say that directly, because the story of leaving is too often told as if the departure is the conclusion, as if the door closes and the hard part ends, and what remains is simply the pleasant work of rebuilding. For Elena, walking out that door was not the end of the danger. It was the beginning of a different, and in some ways, more complicated chapter of it, because the person she had left was still present in the world, still capable, still, in his own mind, possessed of a claim on her and on her daughter that a single night's departure did not dissolve. The shelter was safe. It was also fluorescent lights and shared bathrooms and the specific disorientation of a life suddenly stripped of everything familiar, even the familiar things that had been harmful. Maya asked every night for the first 2 weeks when they were going home. She asked it in the particular way of a child who is not fully sure that the answer she is going to receive is the one she wants. And Elena would smooth her daughter's hair in the dark and say, quietly, that they were home, that this was home right now, and she would believe it a little more each time she said it. Repetition as a form of construction, saying the thing until it became true. Daniel contested everything. He contested it through lawyers and through the legal process and through every mechanism available to him. And Elena had to navigate all of it while simultaneously trying to build a new life from almost nothing. The process was long and grinding in the way that systems of protection can be grinding even when they are functioning as intended. There were hearings. There were forms. There were moments when the institution that existed to protect people like Elena seemed to look past her in the direction of procedure, of paperwork, of the next case in the queue. There were days she sat in waiting rooms and felt so exhausted and so alone that the idea of continuing felt genuinely impossible. On those days, there was Rosa. Rosa was an advocate at the shelter who had been doing this work for 11 years. She had a direct, practical manner and a habit of appearing with coffee at the moments when coffee was most needed. She did not perform sympathy or speak to Elena in the softened, careful tone that well-meaning people sometimes use with women in crisis, a tone that, however kindly intended, carries within it the implication of fragility. Rosa spoke to Elena the way you speak to someone whose intelligence and capability you respect. She helped her understand the process. She sat with her before hearings. She made phone calls. She followed up. She treated Elena's case not as one among many, but as the specific, individual situation of a specific, individual woman who deserved to have someone fully present in her corner. Elena has said that Rosa was one of the people who helped her remember who she was. Not through anything dramatic, simply through the daily accumulation of being treated as someone worth the effort. Maya started therapy. She drew pictures in her sessions. Her therapist had found that drawing was the mode through which Maya most readily accessed and expressed what she was carrying. In the early weeks, the drawings were small and dominated by dark colors. Figures without faces, houses without windows, spaces that felt enclosed. Her therapist did not push. She simply made space for whatever needed to come out in whatever form arrived. Then, gradually, week by week, the drawings began to change. Color returned. Then windows appeared in the houses. Then the figures acquired faces. Then other figures appeared alongside them. Friends, perhaps, or imagined companions, the population of a world that was slowly expanding again. And one afternoon, some weeks into the process, Maya drew a son. Her therapist mentioned it to Elena afterward. Just that one detail. Maya drew a son today, and Elena stood in a corridor outside a therapy office and pressed her hand over her mouth and held herself together with the specific, fierce effort of a woman who has learned to hold herself together even when every part of her wants to give way. Elena found work. Real work, with her name on the paperwork, with a paycheck that was deposited into an account that belonged to her alone. She opened that account on a Tuesday morning and signed her name at the bottom of the form and pushed the paper back across the counter and felt something shift in her chest. Something quiet and enormous. She felt, for perhaps the first time in years, like a person who existed in the world in her own right. Not in relation to him. Not as a function of what she managed or absorbed or enabled. Simply as a person. A woman with her own name on her own account. She has said it was one of the strangest and most significant moments of the entire journey. Stranger, in some ways, than the night she left. Because leaving was adrenaline and urgency and the pure animal force of a mother protecting her young. This was quieter. This was sitting across from a bank employee on a Tuesday and understanding that her life, from this point, was being built with materials that were entirely her own. The legal process concluded eventually. Not perfectly. These things rarely do, and anyone who tells you otherwise is telling you a story rather than the truth. But it concluded with Maya's safe, with an arrangement that protected her daughter, with the future, even if still uncertain and still requiring work, belonging to them rather than to someone else's definition of what their lives should contain. There's still hard days. Elena says this clearly and without apology, because she understands that the version of recovery that claims to have left everything behind is a performance rather than a reality. She still checks exits when she enters rooms. Certain sounds still produce a physical response that bypasses thought entirely and goes straight to the body. Healing is not a straight line. Anyone who has done it seriously will tell you the same thing. It doubles back. It stalls. It asks you to revisit things you believed you had already dealt with and deal with them again from a slightly different angle, with slightly more of yourself available for the task. But she sleeps now, fully, deeply, in the way that had become impossible for so long that she had stopped remembering it was possible. She sleeps and wakes without the specific dread of what the day will require her to manage. She wakes up in the morning in a space that is hers, with a daughter who is safe, and the day opens in front of her without a pressure system moving in from the edges of it. And Maya laughs now the way children are supposed to laugh. Unguarded, unself-conscious, the full body, unself-monitored laugh of someone who does not have a background calculation running. She laughs in a way that reminds people who knew Elena before the way Elena herself used to laugh. Before the walls went up. Before the world was required to be managed rather than lived in. In her final interview, Elena was asked one question. What did she want people who had never been where she was to understand? She was quiet for a moment. She looked at her hands in her lap. She seemed to be deciding not what to say, but how to say it in a way that would actually reach the person it needed to reach. Then she looked up. She said she wanted people to understand that she was not weak, that what she had been doing every single day was not passivity or denial or an absence of self-respect. It was calculation. It was the continuous, exhausting work of assessing a situation that was genuinely dangerous and making decisions based on that assessment with the information and resources she had available. She said that leaving, for her, was not obviously the safe choice. It was in many ways the most dangerous moment, the point of highest risk, the moment that required the most from her when she had the least left to give. She said she wanted people to stop asking why she didn't leave sooner. She said that question, however well-intentioned, places all of the responsibility on the person who was being harmed, that it asks the wrong question, that the right question, the more honest and more useful question, is what we have built as a culture and as a set of institutions and as a collection of communities that makes leaving feel impossible. What we have failed to provide that would make safety genuinely accessible to women before they reach the point of having nothing left. And then she said one more thing. She said it directly to the camera, which she had not done until that moment. She said she wanted every woman who was sitting somewhere right now with a phone number memorized and a piece of paper folded into the lining of something. She wanted that woman to know not to throw it away. She said the moment would come. She said that when it came, that woman would be ready, because she had been getting ready all along, in every small act of preservation, in every quiet refusal to fully give up on herself, in every day she got through and the next one after that. She said, "You are not as alone as he has made you believe you are, and the door exists, even when you cannot see it." And then she looked away from the camera and back at her hands, and the interview was over. Sometime after filming concluded, Maya was asked if she wanted to say anything. She thought about it for a moment with the particular seriousness of a child who takes questions seriously. Then she said, "My mom is the bravest person I know. Not because she stayed, not because she endured, because she left." Now let me ask you something. If you had been in Elena's position, making those decisions every day, carrying that weight in silence, would you have recognized the moment to leave? Or would you still be telling yourself that staying was the safer choice? Think about that carefully, because stories like this are not rare, and they are not far away. They are happening closer than most people realize. If this story made you feel something, or made you see things differently, make sure you subscribe to the channel. This is where we tell stories that matter, stories that are often ignored, and stories that might help someone find the courage they did not know they had. And if even one person hears this and realizes they are not alone, then this story was worth telling.